My name is Joseph. I'm 71 years old, and I now live in a small apartment in Sarasota, Florida. I've been a lot in this life, husband, worker, father, and for a long time, I thought that being a father was being a guarantor of everything, the bills, the emotions, the dreams of others. But tell me what, have you ever been kicked out of the house you helped pay for? Have you ever heard from the mouth of your own blood the phrase, "Go away," or do I call the police? Because I heard. And it wasn't in a moment of anger, no. It was cold, with decision. Maybe you're here because you know that weird feeling, that at some point something broke and no one warned you. You gave everything, and when you needed to be heard, it became uncomfortable. I understand, and in this video I'm going to tell you exactly how this happened to me, how I went from being a pillar of my daughter's house to a stranger with a summons, but I'll also show you how I turned the tables. Not with shouting, not with fights, with paper, silence, and a choice. Because when they told me to leave, I only did one thing. I called the broker. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. I never imagined that I would hear from my own daughter the phrase, "Go away or I'll call the police." Never. But that day, standing in the middle of the room I helped to build, looking at the floor, as if looking for an explanation in the cold tile, I could only take a deep breath and call the broker. That gesture, so simple, changed everything. And if you think the worst had already happened there, wait until you know what I found, hidden in the contract I signed for love. Look, telling this is not easy. It still hurts, even after everything. So if you're here with me, listening to me so far, I only ask you one thing. Stay. And if you feel that this story also moves you, leave a like, subscribe. It's not out of vanity, it's for me to know that I'm not talking to myself, that there are people on the other side who understand what it is to give too much and be discarded as if it had never existed. Your support is what gives me the courage to continue this outburst, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Emily has always been my weak point. Since I was little, with that messy hair and the sweet way of holding my hand, I knew I would do anything for her, and I did. When she grew up and met Brian, I confess that I found him a little too eager, a little good at conversation and little attitude. But if she loved, who was I to judge? Time passed. She became pregnant. I helped with the trousseau, with the new car, with the baby's room. And then came the big dream, owning a home. It was in Riverview, 40 minutes from Tampa. A quiet neighborhood, houses with double garages, lawns in front, and neighbors who said, "Good morning." When she showed me the house, her eyes shining, I saw again the same little girl who asked me to push higher on the swing. "Dad, it's our dream home, but we can't get credit without someone with a strong name." At that time, I was already retired. After years of working on construction sites, renovating other people's houses, repairing roofs with the sun on the back of my neck and cracking knees, I finally had my little corner, my regular retirement, a clean name and peace. But the heart spoke louder. I signed as a co-signer. I paid part of the down payment. I didn't make a contract. I didn't require paper, because for me, family doesn't need a witness. It needs confidence. Emily cried when they handed over the key. He hugged me tightly. He said, "Dad, everything I do in this house will have your name on it." In the first few years, it was good. Very good. On Sundays, I would go there with an apple pie that I learned to make after I was widowed. We had lunch on the balcony. The little one, my granddaughter, called me Grandpa Joe. I remember a barbecue that Brian had, smoked ribs, corn in butter and cold beer. He said out loud, "This house only exists because Joe believed in us." I kept quiet, but inside my chest swelled. For a while, everything seemed right. I took my granddaughter to the neighborhood playground, planted flowers in the front yard, helped with changing the air conditioning filter. It was a home. I was part of it. But do you know when the light goes down and you don't even realize that you are already in the dark? It was like that. First came the postponements. "Dad, this Sunday we can't do it. Let's go out with some friends." Then the short answers on the cell phone. Viewed and unanswered messages, invitations that were once certain, disappeared. I began to notice that when I arrived, Brian would change his tune. Emily no longer looked into my eyes as she used to. The granddaughter, now grown up, was already with other interests. The last Christmas I was there, my chair was leaning against a corner. The table was full, but I felt empty. The gift I took was closed until the end of the night. I came home that day with a package in my lap, and the wrapped breast too. And then came the question, did I do too much? Have I given so much that I have stopped being valued? Moment of reflection. Request for comment. It's funny how sometimes when you give it your all, people think you have nothing left to lose, as if his presence was guaranteed, as if his love were a service. Have you ever felt that? If at any time in your life you have given more than you have received. He comments below with a, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." I will read each one, with the same respect I have always had for those who reached out to me. But going back, after a while, even my entrance became uncomfortable. Once, I arrived unannounced, as I had done before, and felt the atmosphere freeze. Brian said, "Next time, text first, okay?" I smiled, I swallowed. I left before dessert. And deep down, I knew something had changed. But I still had no idea how big the crack formed behind the walls of that house. A crack that went far beyond concrete. It was respectful, and the worst, I was yet to discover that key that was once handed to me with tears, it had been used to lock the door in my face. Do you know the exact moment when everything turned around? Well, I remember it clearly. It was an ordinary afternoon with clear skies, and the next thing I heard was, "Go away, or I'll call the police." But what did I do after that? It's what no one expected. And I'll tell you, after that cold Christmas, and not because of the weather, but because of the way, I started to pay more attention to the details. It was no longer just a vague feeling that I was left over. It was a certainty that was growing slowly, like mold on a forgotten wall. Emily took days to answer my messages. Sometimes he didn't even answer. When I called, it fell into voicemail. And when he returned, his voice was always hurried, like someone talking to a telemarketer who didn't ask for it. Brian then, I didn't even try to disguise it anymore. He avoided staring at me, spoke softly, dryly. When I arrived at the house, he would stay on the phone or go out to solve something. Once, I went there on a Saturday morning, as I used to do, just to have a coffee with them. And I was greeted with a little yellow smile and "If I knew I was coming, I would have warned you not to miss the trip. We are leaving." It felt like a flyer they hand out on the street, and you throw it away on the next corner. On my granddaughter's birthday, I was placed right in the corner of the table next to the broom cabinet. I took a photo with her, but I noticed that the photos printed later, the ones they pasted on the wall of the house, didn't even have an image of me. Not even my name appeared on the top of the cake where they wrote, "Congratulations, Princess," in pink letters. I was just a spectator, an unwanted guest on the set I helped build. But I still insisted. I thought it was a phase, that the tiredness, the rush, the weather could explain that coldness. But everything has a limit. One day I got there, and while Emily was taking a shower and Brian was taking a call in the backyard, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. Next to the refrigerator, on top of the small table, there was a pile of open envelopes, some lying on the ground. Curious, or perhaps already with the feeling of falling, I bent down and began to gather. One of them caught my attention, Banco de Crédito Residencial. Other, notification of late payment. Line of credit secured by property. My heart jumped. I knew that format. I had seen it in so many houses that I renovated, in so many homes about to collapse. They were collection letters, and they were piling up. I took one of them, opened it. There was the amount, $12,000. Another said $9,000. And they all had the same address, Riverview's house, that house, the one with my name on the paper. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if a scaffold had collapsed inside me. But he said nothing. I put the papers where they were, took a deep breath and returned to the living room, pretending normality. Emily came downstairs, smiled, commented on the weather. I smiled back, but my mind was in a whirlwind. I tried to convince her, the following week, to have lunch with me outside, just the two of us. She made up an excuse. I insisted by message. I said I wanted to talk. He replied to me 3 days later with a, "It's busy here, Dad. We'll schedule it later." And he never scored. I still didn't want to believe it. He was still looking for explanations. Maybe Brian was having a hard time and didn't want to worry Emily. Maybe they were trying to figure it out on their own. Perhaps. But their silence was too loud, and my confidence, already shaken, began to become suspect. Were they hiding something from me? Was my name being used to cover debts? The answer would come. And when it arrived, it didn't come as a request for help. It came as a scream, a cry that echoes in my memory to this day. Because when I knocked on that door with the papers in my hands, Emily looked at me as if I were an invader, and said the phrase that changed my life. But do you know what really happened that day? What did I see in her eyes, even before the words came out? Well, that's what I need to tell you now. It took me weeks to get the courage. I gathered all the papers in a black folder, one of those old ones that still smelled of new paper even with time passing. It had bank statements, collection notices, copies of contracts that came in the mail, and in the middle of them, a letter from the bank saying that if the payments were not regularized, the house could be foreclosed in court, all in their name, but with my name at the end, as a guarantor, as a guarantee, as a shield. I didn't sleep well that week. I sat in the armchair in the living room, staring at the white wall, wondering how to approach my daughter without seeming accusing, because I still wanted to believe that there was an explanation, that she didn't know, that they were trying to protect her from that. I wore a light blue shirt, dress pants, polished shoes, as if it were for a serious but respectful conversation. He was still a father. It was still Hart. I went to Riverview. I rang the bell. She took a long time to answer. When he opened the door, he had his hair tied up, an old T-shirt, and a look of tiredness, or perhaps distrust. "Hi, Dad," she said dryly. I tried to smile. "We need to talk, Emily. It's important." I showed him the folder. She didn't even invite me in. He stood at the door, watching. "What is it about?" I swallowed hard. "About the house, about the loans that are on top of her. I received letters. I'm worried about you." She frowned. "If you came here to make things up, you'd better come back." "Emily, I have the documents. Brian put the property as collateral. I saw it. He opened credit using my name and—" "Enough, Dad." She cut me off, her voice louder. "You're getting into a matter that doesn't concern you." "How does it not concern me, my daughter? My name is on the contract. I am a co-signatory. If this house goes up for auction, I will be the one who will answer too." She stepped forward, slammed the door behind her body. "I can't believe you came here to accuse me. We already have too many problems." I tried to calm down. I spoke more quietly. "I'm not accusing you. I'm trying to protect you." "No, Dad. You're trying to control." As he always did. "You never trust anyone." "Emily, I trusted. I put my name on this house for you. And it was then that she screamed. Really. It wasn't a voice boost. It was a scream. "Go away, or I call the police." I froze. For a second I thought it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, or that someone had pressed the wrong button and put my life in a movie backwards. She looked at me as if I were an invader, a stranger, as if my presence there threatened her peace, and not the other way around. I lowered my arms. He said nothing more. I looked at her as I did the day she was born, covered in blood and hope, but now she was covered in hurt and ingratitude. I turned my back, walked to the car, put the briefcase on the passenger seat, and before starting the engine, I called the broker. "Richard, remember that conversation? That's that. Let's move on." My voice no longer trembled. It was a firm silence, which only those who have already been crushed inside can maintain on the outside. But did she have any idea what that meant? Did she know that on that day she didn't just lose her patience? Because what was I going to do next? No one imagined it. And that's where the story changes tone. And of course, I drove back slowly. The road from Riverview to Sarasota has never seemed so long. His hands on the wheel trembled a little, but not in anger. It was a mixture of emptiness and memory. I got home in the late afternoon. The sun was hitting the corner of the curtain, crossing the room as if to show me that there was still beauty, even after what happened. I entered, dropped the briefcase on the table, and stood there in the middle of the room. The refrigerator made that low, constant noise. The television turned off, reflected my crooked image. And the armchair, the same one where I sat to read the newspaper, where my wife rested her legs at the end of the day, it was there, motionless, like all that remained. Sat. I didn't cry, not even at that moment. I don't know if it was the shock or if the pain was too deep to come out of the eyes, but I felt small, not because of what she said, but for what I allowed to happen. I kept remembering the times I took Emily to school, still sleepy, with her hair badly combed and a pink lunchbox in her hand. I remembered when he asked me for the blue bike when I was 8 years old, and I sold my drill to complete the value. I remembered the day I had to choose between fixing the roof of my house or paying the last installment of her college, and I chose her. I always chose her. I felt ashamed. Not hers, from me, for having trusted so much. Because I thought that love was enough, that presence was enough to guarantee respect. I got up, went to the kitchen, put water on the fire. I prepared a strong coffee, the kind that scrapes the throat and wakes up even sleeping thoughts. I sat down again, now with the cup in my hand, and looked at the folder. Open. I picked up, one by one, the papers I kept. Mortgage agreement. Deposit statement I made when they checked in. Transfer receipts. Letters from the bank. It was all there. Tidy. As I always have been. I thought, if it's going to end, let it be right. I opened a drawer. I took an old envelope. In it, there were some photos of Emily as a child. One of them, on her mother's lap, smiling at me. Another, older, receiving the diploma. They all had my gaze. That same look of someone who is there, present, of those who have never failed. I leaned the photos to my chest and closed my eyes. The silence of the house weighed more than any noise. And even so, I didn't feel defeated. Do you know why? Because something inside me at that moment turned a key. I wasn't going to take revenge, but I wasn't going to be silent either. They had already ripped me out of the house. I wasn't going to let them take me away from my dignity. I was going to make my silence a hammer, one step at a time. I would start by putting it all together, putting it in order, informing me. I didn't go to fights, I was going to justice. And it would be done with paper, not with shouting. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. And it's not just about me. It's about what happens to those who give too much, with those who love too much, with whom, because it is ground, it is stepped on. But I promise, there is still something big to come. Because that night, while the coffee was getting cold, I made a discovery, and she changed everything. Do you want to know what I found in the middle of those papers? Just wait and see. I spread all the papers on the living room table. I had an account of everything that was a bank, a statement, a registered letter, even a copy of the first mortgage contract we signed together, me, Emily, and the bank manager. I remember that day well. She wore a light blue dress, was nervous, and held my hand as if she were still that little girl on the swing. "Dad, are you sure?" she asked. I just replied, "Sign, daughter." Trust is not written on paper, but it is here. I pointed to my chest. Now, years later, the same roll was in front of me, but with a very different weight. I read and reread each clause. And then, in the middle of the third page, I found what I was looking for. Joint and several co-signatory with proportional co-ownership rights. In other words, that house was not only theirs, it was mine too. Legally, I was entitled. Right to sell, to question, to act. I picked up the phone and called an old acquaintance, Donald, a retired lawyer, who for many years practiced real estate law here in Tampa. A friend from the time when you still hit nails with a hammer and solve things with a handshake. "Donald, can you take a look at some paperwork for me?" I asked. He came the next day. He brought a magnifying glass, one of those that only old lawyers use, sat with me at the table, and we read it, line by line. When he got to that clause, he tapped his finger and said, "Joseph, this is gold. Not only do you have legal responsibility for the debt, but you are also the rightful owner of part of the property. It gives you the power to intervene." That was like taking a weight off your chest. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in the house I helped raise. I felt that the law was with me, that no matter how much they pushed me out the door, I still had the key to justice. But it didn't stop there. Donald, always meticulous, asked to analyze the other papers, the loans I had found at Emily's house. And then came the second bombshell. Brian had opened 2 lines of credit, totaling more than $30,000, using the house as collateral. In both, there was my electronic signature, but I never signed that. I never received an email. I never gave an endorsement. Donald looked at me seriously. "Joe, this could be forgery, and depending on the bank, it is a federal crime." I felt a chill down my spine. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. Now it was legal, and perhaps even criminal. "What about Emily?" I asked. "Does she know that?" Donald sighed. "It's hard to say. It may be. It could be that Brian did it all by himself on the sly. But what matters is that you're being dragged into this, and you need to act." I closed the folder. I looked at the table full of evidence. On the one hand, the papers. On the other, the memories. And in the middle, me, trying to balance the love of a father and the justice of a man who won't accept being made a fool of. I got up from my chair slowly, like someone who carries years on his back. And I thought, if even the paper recognizes my value, why did they forget? The time to wait has passed. Now it was time to move the right pieces. And do you know what my first step was? It was simpler than it seems. And it started something that no one expected. Do you want to know what was the movement I put into practice? And that changed the fate of everything? So follow me, because now the story is starting to turn. As I sorted the documents by type, mortgage, statements, loans, notifications, the dust of time began to lift along with the memories. Funny how paper messes with us, right? There are leaves that weigh more than stones. And there, between receipts and signatures, I began to remember where it all began. Emily was born on a cloudy Monday. I remember because I changed shifts at the construction site so I could go with your mother to the hospital. She came small, wrapped up like a promise. And since that day, my life has revolved around her. At the time, I was working on a construction site near Lakeland, installing aluminum roofs in the middle of the Florida summer, 36 degrees in the shade, the kind of heat that burns even thought. Even so, I left every day before sunrise. I came back only after he was gone, all to ensure that Emily had what I didn't have: education, dignity, and opportunity. During her adolescence, I worked overtime until dawn. And when he had no work, he used to work as a side hustle, installing drywall, repairing plumbing, cutting neighbors' lawns. We didn't take a vacation for almost 10 years. There was a summer when she wanted to go to Disney with her friends from school. I sold my toolbox to complete the ticket price. I kept an old woman borrowed from a colleague for months. Emily never asked me for luxury. But I made a point of giving everything I could. Because for me, a father's love was proof. It was not spoken, it was lived, and now I was there, sitting in a cold room, alone, organizing documents to protect myself from my own daughter. Hurts. It hurts in a way that doesn't bleed on the outside, but leaves everything hollow on the inside. I also remembered her mother, my companion for 28 years, strong, calm woman who had a gift for listening even in silence. When she died, Emily was still in college. I held back my tears for weeks so as not to let the girl collapse. I told her, "Now it's just me and you, daughter, but it will work out." She cried on my shoulder, shook my hand. That day, I swore to myself that I would never let her miss anything. And that's why, years later, when she showed up saying she wanted the house in Riverview, I didn't even hesitate. "Dad, the bank doesn't approve if you don't sign along." Signed, without thinking twice, because in my head, it was still me and her. Now she saw me as a threat, as someone who interfered. It's hard to swallow that. It is difficult to accept that the man who built the foundation became the weight of the structure. And you know, there's one thing I've learned from life. The past never sleeps. He waits for us to stop to rest, and he comes back, whispering everything we tried to forget. I'm telling you all this here because there's a moment in this story, which is yet to come, where everything turns in a way that even I didn't believe. So if you think you've seen the worst, stay here with me. There is still a lot that needs to be said. I went back to the papers. I classified everything with clips, post-its, dates. I wanted to be ready for whatever came. It was no longer just about protecting myself financially. It was about rescuing who I was. I could have let it go. I could have swallowed this hurt and walked away in silence. But there is a point that even the calmest man understands. If you don't get up, they will continue to step on you. And at that very moment, between the pile of papers and the memory of Emily with bangs, I decided that it would no longer be ground. But do you know what my first real move was? The first concrete action I took after all this? It was small, but it completely changed the course of history, and that's what I'm going to show you now. The next morning, I called Richard, the broker. I knew him for a long time, from those times when I was still doing maintenance in the condominiums of Apollo Beach. Discreet people, down to earth. "Richard, I need an appraisal of Emily's house, the one in Riverview." He didn't ask anything. We scheduled it for 2 days later. On the appointed day, we went early, with the sun still rising slowly in the Florida sky. I stood across the street, leaning against the hood of the car, while he took discreet photos, analyzed the structure, and measured with those trained eyes of someone who understands that every detail is worth money. 30 minutes later, he returned. "Joe, you're going to want to sit down and listen to this." We sat on a park bench nearby. He opened the folder. "The house today is worth almost double what you paid. The neighborhood has appreciated in value, the area has become a route for a new school, and there is a shopping center being built 2 blocks away." I swallowed hard. "What if it is sold now?" I asked. He did a quick math. "Even with the outstanding debt, there is a considerable amount left, but for that you need to trigger the sharing. As a co-owner, you can request this through the courts. It's not simple, but it's possible." The information hit hard. Part of me wanted to run there, yell at both of them, demand explanations, raise my voice for everything they silenced me. But the other part, the one who remained silent at that door, watching her daughter scream, this part wanted justice with dignity. I went back home and called Donald, the lawyer. We scheduled a meeting. I took all the documents, including Richard's assessment. Donald read it carefully. In the end, he closed the briefcase with a snap and said, "We can file a request for sale by sharing. You are legally protected, and if they don't want to sell, you can request your share in cash." He doesn't smile. I didn't even celebrate. But I felt as if I had, for the first time, a cane to support my soul, because the weight of betrayal was already pulling my whole body down. In the following days, I started to gather the certificates, filled out forms, signed petitions, all in silence. Emily texted dryly, "Is everything okay?" I saw it, but I didn't answer. Brian called. He left a message. "Joe, let's talk." I deleted it without hearing it until the end. They treated me like a stranger. Now I was going to act as the owner. No revenge, no scandal, only reality, naked and raw, registered in a notary's office. And while I was filling out the last paper of that week, a memory came to me. The day I handed her the key to that house. "This is the key to your future, daughter." And now I was getting it back, not the physical key, but the part that was still mine. And more than that, the part of me that had been buried under layers of silence and humiliation. No, there is a time when the pain is transformed. It becomes clarity. It becomes a limit. And sometimes it turns into courage. Have you ever felt that? If you've reached that point, comment below with a "I understand you" or "I know how it is." This shows me that I'm not alone on this road. But going back, I hadn't told anyone yet. I didn't talk to neighbors. I didn't look for Emily. I didn't even bring it up with my granddaughter. The plan was simple. Let the papers speak for me. But one night, I received a strange envelope in the mail. No sender. Inside, only one leaf. But what was written there, it made me freeze. Do you have any idea what might be in an envelope that changes everything? That's that. I didn't expect it either. But now, I needed to prepare. Because what came after? It would mess with everything even more. That night, I was sitting on the balcony of my small apartment with an old blanket over my shoulders and the sound of crickets taking over the dark. The city was sleeping, but inside me there was a turmoil that would not let me close my eyes. The envelope was still on the table, open. No sender, no date, just a sheet of letters typed in cold, impersonal font. "If we continue with this, we will all lose. Think carefully about what you are doing." No subscription, but I knew that tone. Brian, it might not even have been signed, but the smell of veiled threat, of barely disguised manipulation, was his. I stared at the paper as if staring at a crooked mirror. Earlier, Emily had texted, "You need to stop it. It's ruining our lives." Short and to the point, as if I were the aggressor, as if she hadn't pushed me out with the words that still echoed in my head every morning. I wondered if she had read the contracts. He knew about the debts. Or if I was still bewitched by that guy who never inspired me with confidence. 2 hours later, I heard footsteps in the hallway, knocks on the door. Strong, rhythmic. I got up slowly, my heart already warning that it was not a good thing. Open. It was him. Brian. The same Brian who barely spoke to me on birthdays was now there, at my door, at 10:30 p.m. The red face, the light eyes. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms. "Out here." He leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "If we continue with this process, things will get ugly. Don't ruin your daughter's life because of pride." I swallowed hard. The old me would have answered. He would have screamed. He would have said everything that was stuck. But the man I have become has learned that silence can also be an answer. I just looked, long, steadfast, and I closed the door. I went back to the balcony and stayed there, seated, alone, feeling the world shrink around me, Emily on the other side, my granddaughter, without knowing anything. And I was there, with the feeling that I had lost everything. The father I was, the grandfather I dreamed of being, the man who thought he could fix anything with effort and goodwill. The hard truth is that love sometimes is not enough. And respect is not inherited, it is cultivated. It came to my mind the first time I took Emily to see the sea. She must have been about 4 years old. It was in Clearwater. She ran so much on the sand that she fell on her face and started crying. I took her in my arms, shook the sand, and she asked, "Dad, does the sea swallow us?" I said, "No, daughter, the sea only swallows those who forget to swim." And that night I understood that I had forgotten to swim, to breathe, to protect myself. But within all that silence, one thing still stood: the foundation, that invisible structure that we create inside when we live with truth. I could be alone, yes. He could have been betrayed, ridiculed, but the man who built walls under the blazing sun and endured the pain of a wife's grief without falling apart, this man was still whole, only hidden. I thought about stopping everything. I thought about writing a letter and letting it go. But then something cut me inside. What if I shut up? What comes next? What else will they use with my name? What else will my granddaughter see being pushed under the rug? No, I couldn't stop. That morning, I understood that the greatest strength does not come from shouting. It comes from the firm silence of those who know they are right. It comes from the calm of someone who has already lost a lot. And for this reason, he no longer accepts losing his own value. And I ask you, have you reached that point in which everything seems to collapse, but a part inside, deep inside, still pulsates? Because it was there that I discovered who I really was. But what I didn't expect, it was what would come the next morning: a phone call, a name on the screen that I hadn't seen in a long time, and information that would change everything. Do you have any idea who came to me? Well, get ready, because now history turns, and it turns for real. I woke up before the sun rose, not with insomnia, with purpose. For the first time in months, I didn't feel dragged for another day. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen, prepared my black coffee, the kind that scratches the chest and clears the thought. Then I went to the bedroom, opened my wife's old desk, where she kept letters, clippings, and handwritten recipes. Sat. I turned on the lamp and took a deep breath. It was time to act firmly, without haste, without shouting. I took the pen, that thick blue one that I used to fill out forms at the time of civil construction, and started writing. It was not a letter. It was the beginning. A document, an official request. I wrote with the calm of someone who has already lost everything and, for this very reason, is no longer afraid. One sentence after another, I reported the facts: co-ownership, the clauses ignored, undue loans, the veiled threats, the forced silence. Next to it, all the evidence I had patiently gathered: statements, photos of the bank letters, the appraisal made by Richard, the documents signed by me, the copies of the records at the notary's office. Each paper was a brick. I wasn't raising a wall. I was preparing the base for something that wasn't going to fall easily. With everything organized, I called Richard. He answered with that calm way of someone who has seen everything in the market. "Richard, can we go through with the request?" He took a deep breath, as if he had already expected that. "Let's go. With this documentation and your name on the contract, we have the basis to start the forced sale process. It's not fast, but it's fair." Then I called Donald. I explained that I was ready. "We will file the request for sharing this week," he said. "But you need to know, this will mess with her, with both." I was silent, not out of fear, but because I knew that from then on there would be no turning back. It was no longer about heartache. It was about justice. And justice sometimes hurts, but it also teaches. The process, according to Donald, required a formal petition based on the right to forcibly divide the common property between co-owners. He drafted the document with surgeon's precision. Mr. Joseph Langford, legal co-owner of the property located in Riverview, requests the opening of a judicial proceeding for the public sale of the same, with proportional division of the values between the parties. Steadfast, simple, unquestionable. I signed it, and look, signing that was like signing my own freedom. It was like breaking the last chains that bound me to the fear of displeasing, to the fear of losing once and for all the love of a daughter who had already turned her back on me. Because there, sitting in silence, I realized true love is not threatened. He doesn't scream. He does not abandon. And if she chose the other side, I chose to stand tall. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes all we need is to hear a story that resembles ours, to remind us that we are not alone in this world. I put the papers back away, organized the copies, scanned everything, and gave them to Donald to take to court. In less than a week, I received the protocol for the opening of the process. The first hearing would be scheduled in 30 days. I didn't call Emily. I didn't send a message, not even to warn. She was going to find out the way she forced me to act. Formally, for justice. But what I didn't expect, it was that even before the hearing, another person would contact me. Someone I hadn't seen in over 2 years. And that he carried with him a secret of those who changed the course of everything. Can you imagine who it was? Well, prepare your heart, because what this person told me, no one could predict. Donald showed up here at home with a blue briefcase under his arm and the expression of someone who has seen this kind of thing more times than he would like. He sat in front of me, opened the paperwork calmly and said, "Joseph, now begins the part that few people understand, and that he respects it even less." He explained to me in that deep, assured voice that the first step would be judicial notice to the occupants of the house, that is, Emily and Brian. It was an official document, delivered with acknowledgement of receipt, informing that the process of sale by sharing was underway and that they, as an interested party, had a deadline to respond. If they ignore it, justice follows. If they answer, we negotiate, but their silence doesn't stop anything. Donald also asked me to block any new financial transactions in my name linked to that property. We filed a secondary petition in court requesting the suspension of new lines of credit, loans, or any type of misuse of the house as collateral. You're still legally bound to that debt, Joe, and as long as that lasts, any madness of theirs affects you directly. This is protection. Agreed. As painful as it was necessary. Meanwhile, Richard began to put together a complete dossier of the estate. Up-to-date valuation, comparison with properties in the same region, appreciation history, potential buyers, all documented. He even visited the condominium pretending to be interested, just to feel the receptivity of the neighborhood and understand the type of family he could buy there. The house is in a great spot. If it goes to judicial auction, it will come out quickly. But if we can sell in a negotiated way, even better. I just listened. He wrote it down. I swallowed anxiety. Days later, the confirmation came. The notification had been delivered. Emily received hers on a Wednesday afternoon, according to the officer. Brian, too. But no answer, no link, nothing. Only silence. The same silence that they threw at me on the day of "go away." Donald was clear. They think it's bluff, that you're hurt, impulsive, and they're waiting for you to give up. But therein lies the deception of many people. They think that the silence of the silent man is a sign of weakness, when in fact it is just waiting for the right moment. Those were strange days, a peace that was not peace, a silence that seemed to scream. But I stood firm. I made my coffees. I walked through the neighborhood. I kept putting the papers together. And every time I looked at the file of the process, I felt as if I were building another house, not of bricks, but of justice. And look, I know this all sounds like a lot, that sometimes feels cold. But the truth is that justice has no heart, and that is precisely why it works. Because while they were still trying to measure my pain by what they thought I could handle, I was already measuring the facts with a notary's rule. It's strange to think that the same daughter who one day brought me heart drawings with the word "Daddy" written with crayons, now he was responding to a lawsuit. But I was not the one who created this abyss. I just stopped pretending he didn't exist. If there's one thing I've learned in my whole life, it's that love needs to have a limit, that giving your all is no guarantee of being seen, and that sometimes we need to protect ourselves even from those we created. And let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. What comes after this part, no one in the family saw coming. Because when justice starts to move, it doesn't come back. If you're still here listening to me, follow me, because the strongest story is yet to come. Can you believe that in the midst of all this, the one who decided to look for me was someone who had never been involved until today? That's right. And this person, it brought with it a memory that made me see everything in a different way. Do you know that missing piece to understand the whole puzzle? She was about to fall into my hand. It was on a Thursday with clear skies. Donald arrived earlier than usual, with a more serious face than ever. He sat in the armchair in the living room, took off his glasses, and looked at me as someone carrying a burden. Joe, we thought it was a serious thing. He opened his laptop, showed a screen with bank history and digital records of recent movements. A refinance application had been made 2 months earlier on behalf of both homeowners, including mine. Here, he said, pointing to the thin line of the electronic signature, Joseph Langford. But the problem is that I had never authorized anything. I never clicked, I never signed, I never knew about this request. Donald looked at me as if asking without having to speak, and I just shook my head. This is forgery, Joe. It is electronic fraud, with the intention of personal gain. And now, my friend, the hole is deeper than we thought. I leaned back in my chair. I stared at the screen for a while as if the name there wasn't mine, but it was. And worse, they were trying to use that name as a tool, as a bridge to cover gaps, bets, and debts that were never mine. Donald took a deep breath. We can attach this to the process. It changes the tone of everything. From a civil litigation, it becomes a criminal case. And not only against Brian. Depending on what we find out, Emily can be implicated too if she is aware. I didn't answer at the time, because a part of me still wanted to believe that my daughter didn't know. That girl with blonde hair and curious eyes, who ran after me in the backyard, asking for another push on the swing. I wouldn't have been an accomplice in something like that. But another part, more tired, more realistic, I already knew. Love blinds, and denial, when fed, becomes a bottomless pit. Donald called a digital expert to prove the forgery. 3 days later, confirmation came. The IP of the signature came from Emily's own home. The date? A Saturday night when Brian was supposedly traveling for work. The ground shook inside. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my knees, my head down. The shame wasn't mine, but the weight was. And there, in the silence of the room, an old memory hit hard. Emily's 8-year anniversary. We didn't have much, but I made a cake with our own hands. I wrote with icing, "To my champion." She hugged me so tightly that to this day I feel the tightness. That day she said to me, "Father, when I grow up, I will take care of you as you take care of me." And look, some memories are like that. It doesn't matter how many years pass, nor how many sorrows come after. There are things that mark us forever, as if time had stopped there at that exact second. Do you also have any memories like this? The kind that tighten the chest? If you do, share it with me here in the comments. Tell me what was left inside you, even as time went by. Sometimes sharing these things helps more than it seems. I went back to the process. Donald updated the judge with the new finding. Richard was on standby. Now, it was not just a matter of sale, but of judicial protection. I, inside, started to transform myself again. The old father who was still waiting for an apology. He was being replaced by a man who demanded justice, not out of revenge, but because letting it go would be a disservice to everything I have built. And you know, the hardest part was not even discovering the forgery. It was realizing that Emily's silence after the notification was perhaps not just pride. Maybe it was already my fault, but I wasn't going to confront it, not even care, nor knocking on the door, because there are times when time is the only one capable of showing who is who. And I had one more move to make, one that was going to put this story on a new level, one that would bring out something that even Brian himself didn't expect. Can you believe that a neighbor decided to look for me after all? What he told me, everything changed, everything really. The noise of the doorbell took me out of the middle of the reading. I already knew that bad things were coming even before I got up. There is a kind of silence in the corridor that gives away when the visitor is not welcome. I got up slowly, adjusted my shirt, and went to the door. It was him, Brian. Crumpled shirt, sweaty face, eyes red with anger or hangover, or both. As soon as he saw me, he didn't even wait for me to speak. "What a dirty game is this, huh, Joseph?" He spat out the words. "Do you want to show up? Do you want to destroy your daughter's life?" I stood there, leaning against the doorframe, just listening. I let him talk, and he did. Tall, run over, with his finger pointed at my chest, as if he were talking to someone who didn't give him a roof. Silence and even credit. "This is all going to fall on you, you know. No one will believe that such a grumpy old man is right in this story. Do you think you'll come out a hero? You're pretending to be a victim, but you're the one who's ruining my family's peace." I didn't move. I just let him drown in his own foam. And when his voice finally gave way to the lack of breath, I said, "You forged my signature." He blinked, as if he didn't understand. Blood ran from his face. "It's all recorded." I continued. "IP of your computer, time of request, forged document. The bank has already confirmed it, the expert too, and the judge has already been informed." I took out of my pocket a laminated copy of the petition that Donald had prepared with all the attachments. I stretched it out slowly. He didn't catch on. He couldn't even look. "You committed a federal crime, Brian. And if you think this is just a family quarrel, well, justice does not work with feeling." He stuttered. For a moment, it looked like I was going to fall sitting down. He looked around as if looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. Emily knew nothing. It was my idea. I just tried to work things out, you know. I was going to pay. I was going to fix everything. You destroyed it," I said softly but firmly, "and now you're going to have to deal with what you've done." It was at that moment that I realized something that made me feel sorry. Brian wasn't just a bad character. He was a coward. A small man trying to manipulate those who still give in. But I didn't give in anymore. He took a step back. He tried to change his tune. "Look, Joseph, maybe we can solve this without having to involve anyone else. No more paperwork, only among us, as men." "It's already settled," I replied, "but not the way you wanted." I closed the door calmly. No anger, no rush. I went to the kitchen, made a new coffee, sat down, and let the strong smell fill the room. And that's when I understood. The most powerful confrontation doesn't need a shout. Just really. Brian left there smaller than he entered. Because the truth, when told without fear, destroys without having to touch it. And what came after that? It was an earthquake on the other side. Because the next day someone else showed up at my door. Someone I hadn't seen since last Christmas, when the family still shared a table. She came with swollen eyes, her hair tied up in a hurry. It's a question I never thought I'd hear. Do you know what was the first thing she said? "Well, prepare your heart, because that part will disassemble you from the inside." On Saturday morning, after a long, sleepless night, I wrote the letter. I wrote as I always wrote everything important in my life, calmly, without too many words, and only with those that really matter. It was not a father's letter, nor a letter of resentment. It was an official communication, clear, direct, and final. I attached the copies of the documents, the court petition, the proof of fraud, the opinion of the digital expert, the court's notification with a deadline for response, and the forecast of auction of the property if there was no agreement. In the end, I only wrote, "As of today, I no longer authorize the use of my name in any negotiation related to this property. All movements are being monitored in court. Joseph Langford." I folded it carefully, put it in the envelope with acknowledgement of receipt, and went to the post office. I stood in line like any other citizen. When the attendant stamped the paperwork and handed me the copy of the registered delivery, I felt a strange lightness, as if I had finally signed the end of a pain that had dragged on for a long time. On the way back, I didn't look back. 2 days later, a message arrived on my cell phone. It was hers, Emily, a short, direct text, and loaded with something that one day would have dismantled me. How could you do that to us? I looked at the screen for a few seconds. Her profile picture with her granddaughter was still the same as months ago. That same little girl that I carried on my shoulder to the swing of the condominium. My finger stopped on the screen. For a moment, I almost opened the message to reread it, but I had already read everything I needed, deleted, without opening, because you see, that was no longer about us. It never was. It was about a father who spent decades trying to be a base, and a daughter who confused love with obligation. It was about a name used, a forged signature, and a house that became a battlefield. And if before I still expected an apology, now he just wanted peace. I was no longer the man who expected to be invited to Sunday lunch. I was the co-owner of a property in litigation, and my silence now was not cowardice, it was strategy. It was there that I understood the true value of the cut, because breaking up is not screaming, it's not slamming doors. It is to stop trying to be heard by those who only know how to listen to themselves. And you know what? When you stop explaining too much, the person who betrays you starts to have to deal with their own echoes. That same week, Donald called me in his usual calm voice. The judge approved the next step. The official summons of the hearing has already been issued. They have 15 days to take a stand. The machinery of justice was already in motion, and no one else could stop her. I sat on the porch that night with a glass of water in my hand, the radio turned on at a low volume, and thought, how much is the silence of a man who is tired of being hurt worth? Because sometimes the firmest answer we can give, it is not answering anymore. And it was exactly in this silence that something unexpected happened. An envelope with no sender appeared in my mailbox. Inside it, an old photo and a ticket. And what was written there? It moved me in a way that not even the judicial subpoena could. Can you imagine what someone tried to remind me of with a single image? Well, prepare your heart. Because what came after that photo changed everything I thought about the past. At the beginning of the following week, my phone rang 4 times, unknown number. I didn't answer any. Then came 2 voice messages. It was Emily's voice, trembling, saying, "Dad, they are knocking on the door here." A man took a picture of our balcony, the living room. He said it is from the sales system. "Father, is this real? Are you really doing this?" The answer was already silent. Yes, it was real. Richard had officially listed the property on the MLS, Multiple Listing Service, and that meant that now any broker in the state could access the sale. An appraiser had already made the technical visit with an appointment and judicial authorization. The house that I once helped finance without charging anything in return, it was now a property in the process of judicial liquidation. Neighbors began to notice the movement. Questions began to arise in the condominium group. Emily couldn't hide it anymore. What was once denial has become public shame. Brian appeared by text. First, with that arrogance disguised as charm. "Joseph, look, I know things got out of hand, but we can solve it. Just take the house off the market, and we settle everything with you in installments. Words of man." I didn't answer. Then came the second message. This one, harsher. "You're destroying your daughter's family. Is that what you want? Do you think you'll be able to sleep peacefully selling your granddaughter's house?" It was hard to hear that, but I took a deep breath. I was silent, and I followed. Because I had already slept too many nights with my soul turned, with my pillow heavy with ingratitude. And you know what? When a man decides not to accept being made of carpet anymore, the ground moves to those who used to step hard. The house started to receive scheduled visits. The broker took both indoor and outdoor photos. He announced it on the portals. In less than 72 hours, 3 firm proposals were made. Florida's valued market was in my favor. And them, good. They began to feel in their skin what it is to play with the patience of those who have always been standing for love. Emily left one more message. One of those that leave, but don't break. Dad, if this is all a lesson, please, I get it. You don't have to go all the way. But I wasn't teaching anything. I was just giving it back. And look, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If this story, in any way, is making you think, like this video and subscribe. We never know who may be needing to hear that there's still time to get up, even after being thrown to the ground by those we raised with our own hands. By the end of that week, their silence had become a mute plea. They stopped calling. They stopped sending messages. They stopped trying to reverse the blame. But the most curious thing was what I received in the mail on a rainy afternoon. A small envelope, no sender. Inside, a handwritten letter. It wasn't Emily's, nor Brian. It was from someone who had watched everything up close and decided to tell what he saw, what he knew, and what almost no one had the courage to say. Are you ready to know what was in this letter? Because what she revealed put the last piece of this puzzle in place and paved the way for the biggest twist in this story. The brown envelope arrived with Thursday's light rain. Thick paper, precise folding, smell of something stored for too long. I opened it carefully, as if I already knew that there was a truth inside. It was a letter, handwritten, simple, clean, feminine handwriting. And the name signed at the end made me hold my breath for a few seconds. Mrs. Lambert, next-door neighbor, retired, discreet, one of those who smiles with her eyes when she sees someone sweeping the sidewalk. Mr. Joseph, I beg your pardon for meddling where perhaps I shouldn't, but there are things that only those who observe from the outside can see clearly. I read each line as if diving into a well. She told about nightly screams she heard from the house next door, about discussions that came from the basement, about visits from strange men charging amounts, coming and going with envelopes in their hands. He said that one night in March he saw Brian throw something in the trash bin in a hurry, and that the next day the collection took the papers without anyone noticing. She thought they were documents, checks, contracts, but the passage that squeezed my chest was when she wrote, "Emily cried alone in the backyard sometimes. Once, when he saw me, he tried to smile and hide his eyes. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know if it was my pain or hers that I felt." I closed my eyes. I held the letter to my chest for a long time, because even after all, a part of me still ached for her, for my daughter. But justice does not bow to nostalgia, and that day when Donald called me, I learned that the outcome had a name, date, and official role. The judge authorized it. He said, his voice firm, "Immediate sale, without the need for an extra audience. Reason, absence of contestation within the deadline." Richard already had a buyer, a Jacksonville investor, cash payment, with a plan to renovate and resell. The proposal was in my hands. Value above expectations. Clean, fair, legal sale. I just needed to sign. I wore the same grey suit I wore to Emily's wedding 17 years ago. Funny how clothes, over time, lose their function and become a symbol. I tied a tie in front of the mirror, adjusted the collar of my shirt, and left. The Hillsborough County Clerk's office smelled like old paper and poorly calibrated air conditioning. I signed with a steady hand, no shaking, without hesitation. There, in that dry stamp, more than the sale of a property was sealed. It was the end of a cycle, the sale of an illusion, the farewell to a type of family that existed more in my memory than in reality. On the way back, I stopped at a small market on the corner. I bought freshly ground coffee and returned home. I prepared it the way I always did, hot water, cloth strainer, blue ceramic teapot. I sat in the armchair in the living room, and there, On the small table was the little plant that Emily brought to me when I was 7. It's a sunflower, Dad. He always turns to the light side. The plant was now just a dry stem in a cracked clay pot, but I didn't throw it away, because some things we keep to remember what was once light. And look, if you've come this far with me, you need to know the most memorable part of this story is yet to come, because there is a type of justice that does not happen in the courts. It happens in the look. And it was precisely one look that changed everything, days later. Can you believe that the last time I saw my granddaughter was in a place that no one expected? And what she told me, it was like a key opening the door to everything that still needed to be understood. Are you ready to know what came out of the mouth of a child who silenced all the adults in this story? Because that's what comes now, and I promise you, you won't forget. The warning arrived on a grey Friday, and this time it wasn't for me. It was for them. The letter signed by the court with a final date of eviction, 15 days. No negotiation, no extension, no knack. The judge was clear. In case of resistance, the removal would be done by court order, with a court official and police reinforcement if necessary. Emily received the notification at the gate. Brian, neighbors said, snatched the letter from her hand and threw it on the floor. Then he disappeared for 3 hours, came back with a frown, locked himself in the garage, and didn't talk to anyone. The following days were strange, too quiet. The same neighbors who used to cross paths with them at the condominium club now just watched, from a distance, the end of a show that they themselves put together. What I was told most was that, at night, it was possible to hear muffled cries coming from the garage. Brian had lost his job weeks earlier, debts on 3 cards, 2 unpaid loans. And as the property was already in the name of the two, with a co-ownership clause, the loss was also in Emily's CPF. What hurt me, and I won't pretend it didn't, was knowing that my granddaughter asked one night why Grandpa wasn't coming anymore. The answer was silence. But look, whoever sows pride reaps absence. On this side, I followed my path with the firmness of someone who has cried everything there was to cry. I didn't go to see the change, but I knew every detail. Richard warned me. They left on Tuesday. The truck took everything. Nobody said anything. Only Emily's look said what the mouth could no longer defend. They didn't leave a note, nor an apology, nor anger, only emptiness. The new owner joined the following Saturday. Young man just arrived from Georgia. He will renovate the house, paint everything, change the garden. The house now has another story. And them? Good. They said they went to Brian's mother's house in Clearwater, that they tried to rent a small apartment, but no one accepts a guarantor. They are depending on favor. There were people who asked if I felt vindicated. And do you know what I answered? No. I felt at peace. Because revenge requires anger, and the anger I left at the gate of that house the day I was called a liar. But justice, justice tastes like bitter coffee at 7 in the morning, strong, direct, and with the silence of a table set for no one, what no one expected. It was that days later I would meet my granddaughter, and she would say a phrase that would dismantle all my certainties. Do you believe that a child can say the most adult thing anyone has ever heard in their life? Well, that's exactly what happened, and I was never the same after that meeting. I moved in on a clear morning, without fanfare, without goodbyes. The small truck arrived at 7, took my few pieces of furniture, some boxes with books, the coffee machine, and that dry plant of Emily's that I still didn't have the courage to throw away. I drove myself to Sarasota, a straight road, without haste. For the first time in a long time, the landscape seemed to breathe with me. The condo was simple but welcoming. Low houses, old trees, a small lake in the background, and neighbors who wave even without knowing you. There no one looked at me as Emily's father. I was just Joseph. The new house had a balcony with a hammock, and the first thing I did was sit there, with a hot cup in my hand and the sound of birds. It was strange at first. The absence of voices, requests, scares, but little by little, silence ceased to be loneliness and became rest. I met new people, widowed housewives, gentlemen like me, who speak more with their eyes than with their mouths. I joined the local library's book club. I started walking early, before the sun weighed down. I was offered to take care of the small garden in Block C. I accepted on the spot. Today, the flowers recognize me. I didn't tell my story to anyone. Here, no one knows what I experienced. And maybe that's why I feel that I can be who I am without having to justify it. I didn't seek reconciliation with Emily, not even with Brian, nor with anyone in that chapter. My heart does not desire revenge. He just wants to keep beating in peace. No. There is a moment when we understand that we no longer need to run after anything, that the love we gave was not lost. It became a root somewhere, even if the recipient never noticed. I started sleeping well, waking up without chest pain, and that, for a man of my age, is more valuable than any excuse. The other day, I sat on the bench by the lake, as I do every Wednesday. The wind was light, and that's where I saw it. From afar, walking along the edge of the lake, came a little girl in a blue dress and hair tied in a ponytail. Next to her, a woman, young, tired, dejected. And when she approached, my heart stopped. It was my granddaughter. She ran up to me without saying anything. He hugged me, as if nothing had happened, as if time had not passed, and the only thing that whispered in my ear was, "I knew you hadn't really left." I was speechless. I just hugged it back. Her mother, Emily, stood there. He did not approach, but it didn't stop it either. He just noted, eyes full of water, without the courage to say anything. My granddaughter looked me in the eyes and asked, "Grandpa, can we still plant a new flower?" At that moment, I understood that certain roots sleep, but they do not die. But can forgiveness flourish in a soil where there has already been so much lying? Can what was broken ever be rebuilt, even if in a different way? That's what I need to tell you now. Because what came after that hug, it was something that even I didn't expect. After that day at the lake, life didn't go back to the way it was before, and thank God for that. There was no cinematic reconciliation, no slow-motion embrace. But there was truth, and sometimes that's all we need. My granddaughter came back to visit me from time to time, always with a shy smile and questions that make me laugh. Emily. He remained silent. He never asked for forgiveness, never explained. But he also never screamed again. And honestly, I don't expect anything more from her. We learned to follow even with loose ends. Today, my routine is made up of hot coffee, slow walks, and a peace that I had never felt, not even in the days of a full house. For 30 years, I was grounded. Now I'm wind. They stepped on me, but I held on. When they tried to bury me, I became roots. When they expelled me, I became an absence. And it was my absence that taught more than any sermon. What I take from this story is not bitterness, but clarity. We spend our lives trying to protect others and forgets that he also needs to protect himself. Love without limit becomes a trap. Forgiveness without discernment becomes repetition. And dignity. This, my friend, is the only ceiling that cannot collapse. If I can leave you with one thing, it's this lesson. Never forget who you are. Even when those you love the most try to erase you. Time reveals everything. And sometimes silence is the loudest cry there is. Thank you for listening to me this far. Really, telling this was not easy. But if this story touched your heart, it leaves a like. It's like a hug that reaches me here on the other side of the screen. And if you want to come back for another coffee with me, subscribe to the channel. We always have more to share. Comment below which city you are watching. It is beautiful to know how far these words go. And it activates the bell, see? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.